In America, there are approximately 7 million nomads, and over half of them have given their allegiance to one of these 7 nomad nations. The Aldecaldos family formed as a result of Los Angeles falling into disarray. Their story began with Juan Aldecaldo. He started life as a migrant and had built a career working in the defense industry. Prior to the collapse, budget cuts forced the industry to downsize, putting Juan out of work, and his family spiraled downward into social poverty. His daughter, Maria, was killed in a car accident the day before her 17th birthday. His son, Ramon, died in a robbery homicide on his 19th birthday. When the media came to interview Juan, he spoke with candor of what had transpired. The interview went viral. At his son's funeral, over 9,000 people attended. His parish priest, Father Dominguez, aka the Padre, gave an impassioned speech that brought the crowd to tears. They had all lost something to gang violence. After the funeral, Juan became despondent. Cancer had claimed his wife years earlier. The only thing that kept him going was his pride in his children. Now they were gone. Eventually, Juan joined Father Dominguez at his mission, assisting orphans. One day, both were injured following a drive-by attack. Aldecaldo subsequently became irate at seeing others forced to bear the same loss as he had. They armed themselves, gathered the faithful, and slowly reclaimed block after block from the gangs. Soon, Aldecaldo had a small subdivision in East Los Angeles under his control. Shortly afterwards, the Pitt Arco nuclear reactor underwent a meltdown. The Aldecaldo group was hired by the federal government to begin reclaiming specific resources, which was followed by a financially lucrative Mexico City redevelopment contract. When the Aldecaldos returned to the USA in 2015, they brought back Johnny Silverhand, who had spent the best part of 2 years hiding after the Arasaka Tower riot. They also had a new leader, Santiago, who had helped Silverhand in the attempted rescue of Alt Cunningham. In 2020, Santiago's Aldecaldos and the Jode Nomad groups would collaborate with Dr. Richard Storm of Storm Technologies to rebuild Chicago. The project would soon collapse as Arasaka detonated a bioweapon in Chicago to deny the city to Militech. While escaping Chicago, Santiago's convoys were maliciously attacked by the Raffin Schiff. Following the Fourth Corporate War, 2 million in Night City were left homeless due to the nuke, either directly or because of flooding from the liquefaction of the city's foundations. Survivors fled into overcrowded tent cities in the surrounding suburbs of Westbrook, Pacifica, and Haywood. Night City turned to the Aldecaldos and the Stormtech Corporation for help. With the experience gained during the Chicago project, the Nomads were uniquely equipped to construct temporary housing from shipping containers and formicrete modules brought in by rail and sea. Jonathan Mehta was born in Lincoln, Nebraska in 1960. Being the nephew of a Medal of Honor winner opened many doors for him, and at age 15 he entered West Point, a US military academy. He graduated top of his cohort. Mehta's military records were completely destroyed during the collapse. Even the hard copies were lost in his case, and this has allowed him a great deal of latitude in later life. After serving as a platoon commander in an armored division and earning a master's degree in electrical engineering at Texas A&M University, he disappeared into the bowels of the Rapid Deployment Force, where his activities became a mystery. During the first Central American conflicts, he disappeared again, this time into the jungles of South America with the newly formed 11th Special Forces. In 2008, where the civilians redesigned the federal government, Jonathan Mehta did not exist. He was not aware of it until the Second South American War ended in 2011. There were a lot of Americans in the area, and many would not go home with the troops. Jonathan Mehta, the one the military still had records of, had died in Vietnam. So, like almost 2 million others, John was simply denied transportation to the United States. In late 2011, Meta left the American command at San Jose, Costa Rica, and with the aid of his Special Forces group hijacked 3C-5B Galaxy aircraft to the port of Panama. There they met up with several thousand more Americans who had been cast adrift and grabbed anything that could float, including the remains of a carrier battle group and 3 offshore drilling platforms of the Panamanian coast. Later that year, they declared independence as a sovereign nation and boasted the threat of nuclear weapons to make refusal to recognize them inadvisable. Given the hardware the Meta now had in their possession, they founded MetaCorp as a security and maritime construction firm. By the end of 2013, MetaCorp was involved in construction of Atlantis Phase 2 and New Galveston. They used the profits from their other jobs, including their growing security division, to construct Meta Key, a mobile island city. Almost every major corporation has an office there, and security is fairly enforced. One of the factors that made Meta Key possible was Meta's development of the Jack suit. MetaCorp built the first working ACPA unit in the world, then sold the patents to Militech in 2017. During the collapse, the folk engaged in widespread criminal activity, and a large black market distribution network was run from their headquarters in Chicago. The folk evacuated their members out of Dust Bowl areas like Oklahoma City, and took all the others they could transport as well. In return, they asked only for favors and help. They understood that people had nothing to give them but promises. Through that network of favors owed, they were able to survive the Chicago bioplague of 2012. Out of the ashes of that disaster came Mr. Cool, and the rebirth of the folk nation as a nomad group. Mr. Cool had done some large-scale smuggling operations in the past, and saw in transport the ability to survive. In his opinion, remaining in one place was tempting fate to strike the folk nation again with a different cataclysm, one by one. He solidified agreements with all the power structures within the folk, primarily by playing enemies off against each other and thereby convincing each one individually to secretly back his hand. Cool was almost assassinated at the Harvest Festival by a rival folk leader, shot 8 times at close range by a small caliber pistol. He used the assassination as a soapbox for his plea for unity, and he branded his enemies as traitors for what they had done. The folk are now primarily interested in transportation as a business, with a strong allegiance to the concept of family and responsibility. The original Jode family came from Oklahoma, Texas, and Kansas. In 1998, the Great Dust Storms obviated the possibility of anyone farming for quite a while, and those that had the strength began heading west towards California. Life was harsh during this period for the Jode refugees. They wanted nothing more than to rest a while and spend the coming autumn in relative peace. The locals, however, were not pleased with the influx of hungry strangers. One evening, a few hundred locals mounted a raid to scatter these nomads. When the attackers struck in the night, they did not have the easy victory they had hoped for. The poorly planned raid fell apart rapidly, and the evening degenerated into a series of disjointed firefights across the Colorado countryside. This unwarranted attack enraged the nomads, for over 400 of their people were killed during the night. The next day, Malachi, a man of God, concluded that each family should send a representative to the council. The representative should not be the most capable member of the family, whom he said should stay on watch in case the attackers returned, but someone trusted by all. That morning, 120 nomads sat in council. Malachi, by virtue of having had the idea, chaired the meeting. Malachi asked the representatives to speak candidly on the issues at hand. All wanted protection for their families, revenge on their attackers, and the freedom to leave this coalition when they felt the time was right. Malachi replied that all their fears and wants were well-founded, and that they could meet these adversities together by signing a partnership. Great ideas should always be put to paper, he said. The Declaration of Independence and the Constitution were written down for all to see. The agreement they signed was simple, and was the basis and inspiration for the current Nomad Code. Protect your family first, then protect the clan. Steal nothing from the others in the clan. Hoard nothing that could benefit others in the clan. It was decided that the able-bodied should go into town to repay the locals for their malicious attack, despite Malachai's objections to revenge. During the night, the Nomads crept in and ransacked all the farm stores and homes they could reach. By morning, the Nomads had killed a third of the populace. They realized that whatever law still existed would be looking for them soon, perhaps with the remnants of the National Guard. They did all they could considering the circumstances. They ran. A week later, the earthquake of '98 stripped Los Angeles of its status as the land of milk and honey. The Nomads realized there might be work for them there, so they camped in a remote area and sent emissaries to speak with the authorities and managed to obtain a highly lucrative deal for the Los Angeles rebuilding contract. The Jodes worked hard and prospered in LA. After that contract ended, they moved into the Northwest, tilling burnt-out forest into fields. Some stayed in California, working other construction jobs, and some joined their nomad brethren on the Transcon Maglev. The name Jode was not something that was adopted by the clan themselves. It was a reference to the Okies in the John Steinbeck 1939 classic, The Grapes of Wrath. First used in a CNN news blurb in early 1998, the term was a general reference to the dispossessed of the Dust Bowls of that year, but with the clan's high profile in the rebuilding of LA, the name soon became synonymous with that group of nomads. After a while, some members co-opted the name for signing legal documents. The first was Malachi, who signed the name Jode on the contract with the city of Los Angeles. The story of the Blood Nation began in the city of Miami, where during the collapse became a total war zone. Miami had been the center of the North American drug trade for almost 20 years, and had also been subjected to massive immigration from Cuba and Haiti. Many of these immigrants belonged to the various criminal organizations of their home countries before coming to America. Naturally, these organizations were dominated by various drug cartels. After the bioplague destroyed the drug crops in 1992, their authority faded away to nothing. One by one, the drug-producing areas of South America were destroyed, with no commercial crop to provide cheap raw materials, and no end to the drought in sight. These criminal elements began fighting each other in a desperate attempt to monopolize the synthetic drug industry, until Miami ended up in flames. Unable to stop the warfare, the government cordoned off the area and let the combatants exhaust themselves. The Bloods who emerged from the ruins of Miami were now a combination of battle-hardened survivors from Caribbean, African American, and South American cultures. When the collapse hit Florida, it was just another in a string of disasters. The state had been rocked by civil unrest, hurricanes, and industrial accidents. There was almost nothing left except the mouse, the Everglades, and the circus. The mouse refers to the Walt Disney Corporation. Disney had spent billions investing in the Florida economy. Most of the Orlando area economy relied on them, and they even had their own city, Buena Vista. As the collapse descended on the Sunshine State, the mouse dug in and waited. It was the declaration of martial law in 1996 that finally forced the park's temporary closure. A closure that would last 5 years. During that time, the mouse's reserves drained away. The Disney Corporation filed for reorganizational bankruptcy in 1998. Sometime in 1999, the Bloods moved from the ruins of Miami to a derelict Walt Disney World, and there they found their calling. Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey Circus has long been known as the greatest show on earth. Once headquartered south of Tampa Bay, the circus was sold to Disney just before the crash. When the collapse made it too expensive to continue touring, the circus moved to safer, permanent facilities at Buena Vista. As the parks closed, many Disney employees and their families moved onto the grounds to keep them safe. When the Bloods took over in 1999, the families who remained were allowed, and in fact, welcomed to stay. The alliance of Disney employees, the circus, and the Bloods created the greatest traveling entertainment group of the new millennium, and would simply be known as the Bloods. Eventually, they used the facilities at Disney World to construct huge trucks and airships to transport themselves across America. In 2008, as civilian control was reasserted in America, the Bloods were forced out of the Disney complex. As troops massed on the western end of the area, the leaders of the Bloods hurriedly met to decide their action. Malcolm Kent Smith, their elected leader, wept openly as he said, "There will be great death and suffering here if we choose to stay. Doubtless, there will also be reprisals on our traveling elements, which are our best hope for survival. I believe we must take to the road, but should we choose to defend here, I wish to lead the first counterattack. My first loyalty will always be to the extended family of the Bloods, but I cannot bear to live if I must see us destroyed." These words sent the Bloods into a pure nomadic existence. They simply took whatever they felt was valuable and left. The Felas Nation goes by several names: Marine Nomads, Sea Nomads, and Water Nomads, but for the most part, Statics simply refer to them as lawless pirates. They derived their culture from fishermen and the coastal inhabitants of the Caribbean and the southern seaboard, when they were being plagued by waterborne gangs, and the central authorities could not or would not protect them. Many loaded their families into boats and took to life on the water. It seemed to make sense. Boats were difficult to locate for government agents, corporates, and gang members alike. Other cultural influences included so-called boat people of many different persuasions who were refused emigration and had no choice but life on the sea, as well as the former drug smugglers who now had many high-quality boats and nothing to do with them. Soon they numbered in the thousands and were present all along the Mississippi, Columbia rivers, as well as the Great Lakes and the coastal areas of the North American continent. Since the collapse, many of these pirates have even co-opted several former drilling platforms and formed mobile marine cities, moving from place to place to build coastal projects like New Galveston and Tampa on the Gulf of Mexico. The Snake Nation was created in response to the formation of the other 6 nations. As these larger groups began to influence and affect both nomad and static communities, these smaller nomad groups realized that to advocate their views, they had to solidify as well. The Snake Nation's leader is Freddie Douglas, aka M-Dog. As M-Dog, he controlled a great deal of the Pacific Northwest drug trade from Seattle. When the bioplague hit South America, M-Dog was out of luck, so he took his closest friends and he sought new pastures. Over the next few years, the Dogs, as their group became known, did what they could to survive. The Dogs made somewhat of a name for themselves, recruiting talented individuals, evolving their organization, and overcoming a host of obstacles in the process. Eventually, the Dogs became one of the main players in the Pacific Northwest, but not without a price. An Aryan separatist group, the Order, had long made the Pacific Northwest their home as well. They seriously disliked the Dogs, given it was largely composed of rebellious non-Caucasian criminals, and most of all, they wanted Freddie dead. In one of the final clashes between the two sides, Aryan groups raided the Dogs' camp. Over 100 were killed that night on both sides, and many were left severely injured. Freddie lost his wife and young son, as well as his left eye and arm, when a crude missile struck his car. Despite these challenging circumstances, Freddie learned to persevere. When the nations formed, Freddie was there, He was determined to stay independent, but as things began to shake out, Freddy and the others became nervous of the power of the new Nomad nations. They felt they had to be equal to compete, and they had to compete to survive. They therefore chose to form a coalition to protect their own interests, giving birth to the Snake Nation. Thank you for chipping in.